Welcome to our December Govern Stage Strategy Review. Just to get started here, I'm going to go over our organization chart since the Govern stage is still fairly new. We now have the compliance group under Govern, as well as the security policies group and the threat insights group. And as part of that, we recently added a new dependency management category under threat insights. So that's the current team, myself, Derek, and Matt, and we're going to each be going through the areas for our respective groups. Before we get started, we are going to be covering a lot of roadmap information, and so you should be aware that any roadmap information that's presented is not for purchasing or planning purposes, and it is subject to change. To get started with the security policy group, some of the highlights over the last 6 months include delivering scan execution policies at the group level in the 15.2 release. And then we just recently followed that up with group and subgroup level scan result policies in the 15.6 release. Both of those were pretty big features that allow organizations to manage their policies centrally at the group level and have those policies flow down to all of the projects inside of their group. We've also made some progress on our vision towards adding support for all of the different types of scanning by adding support for dependency scanning in 15.6. And we've made it easier to use by adding a number of different UI features. We added the ability to view policies listed in the MR settings in 15.0. We added an interactive policy editor validation in 15.3 to help catch errors if you're making mistakes while you create your policy. And then we also added a rule mode in 15.5 for scan execution policies so that users who want to just edit in a UI without having to edit in YAML can do that. Coming up on our roadmap, we have a number of different improvements. The first one is we have plans to add support for running scan execution policies on runners that have specific tags, whereas right now they just run on the default shared runners or untagged runners. We're also working to introduce license approval policies. This is a rather large undertaking. Our current plan is to be able to deprecate and remove the existing license check feature in 16.0, and that means that we'll want to have a replacement for that ready no later than the 15.10 release so that we can give customers adequate time to move over from license check over to the new license approval policies. Making that change is going to provide a lot of the same benefits that customers got when we moved from vulnerability check over to security policies, including allowing them to manage it with a separation of duties between the development team and the security and compliance team. It also will pave the way for us to be able to support managing those policies at the group level so they can be managed centrally. And it provides a full audit log of all changes that are made. And lastly, it allows compliance teams to have an approval workflow in place for anyone who wants to make changes to the policy itself. So that way they can be confident that no one person is going through and making changes to the policy without permission. Also coming up on our roadmap are a number of improvements to the scan result policies. We want to add support for role-based approvers. So if you want to require approval from either developer or maintainer in the project rather than from the security and compliance team, you can do that. We're also working to add a lot of additional scan result policy criteria, including things like filtering based off of the age of the vulnerability. So that way, if you have SLAs that you need to enforce, you can do that by setting up a policy, for example, that would require approval for any new merge request coming in if there was a critical vulnerability already in the default branch that had been there for 30 days or more. Some of the other policy functionality there that we're looking at introducing includes things like filtering on labels, such as whether or not a fix is available and whether or not the vulnerability has been marked as a false positive. And then lastly, we're working to be able to limit group policies only to projects that have specific compliance framework labels. And that's another step towards our long-term vision of bringing security policies and compliance framework labels together into one single solution. With that, I'm going to be turning it over to Matt to cover our threat insights group.
Thanks, Sam. So we'll start with our first category, vulnerability management. The last 6 months, and really the better part of this calendar year, has been a lot of focus on stability and enterprise readiness from the Threat Insights group. We have continued to make a lot of behind the scenes changes to improve things. We call error budget. That's how we track performance internally. And we're at a place where we're really very, very close to meeting the thresholds that we've set out. At the same time, we've seen a large increase in utilization, so we're making sure that we're scaling for not just what we've got today, but what we expect usage to be in the future. We have two very large projects, which are maintenance or re-architecture projects that are nearing completion. The first is storing findings in the database. So findings are really anything that the security scans detect in merge requests or pipelines. There are many, many, many of these, obviously, and today we're using the artifact files generated by the pipeline jobs to power parts of the UI like the merge request security widget and the pipeline security tab. Once we move to the database back model, we should see a number of improvements, not just to performance, but laying the groundwork for future features like letting us track non-default branch locations. So you could have feature branches, it could be a tag, etc. We'll have that information in the database so that we can expose that on the vulnerability report. We are also nearing the completion of a critical re-architecture, which it's pretty down in the weeds, but it essentially is something that's blocking a lot of our top features from moving forward in vulnerability management. This redesign model, we are hoping will finish in the next milestone or two, and this is going to block a lot of our priority features that we've got waiting. Also, a big milestone for us, the effort to align all of the MR widgets in a new framework. There's a new design framework. We've refactored our security widget, so it has the new design, new look and feel. I think it looks great, and glad to see that we're wrapping up and moving forward. On to our roadmap over the next 6 months. So these are two of these top projects that are waiting on that re-architecture work. This has kind of been at the top for a while, but these are still very important. So the first is auto-resolving irrelevant vulnerabilities. This is going to leverage the policies that Sam was talking about. We're looking to create a new policy type that will allow you to auto-resolve vulnerabilities automatically whenever the scans detect that an existing vulnerability is no longer present. This is going to save teams a lot of time operationally because these are things that they wouldn't have to spend time triaging and manually resolving. The other is enhanced filtering. This is actually has kind of expanded our scope a little bit. We're looking a little bit more holistically at how we do filtering, not just in the vulnerability report, but in GitLab itself. We're essentially trying to figure out how can we make a more extensible model for adding a lot of additional advanced filters to something that has so much information, like the vulnerability report. The idea will be we'll start layering in some of these additional filters on top of what you've got today. Also making sure that this works equally well at the group and the project level. Let's go on to dependency management next. So as Sam mentioned, this is still a fairly new category. The main piece of work that we're almost to the finish line with is completing ingesting SBOMs. So these are software bill of materials files, specifically in the CycloneDX format. This is really a big step forward for us because, again, dependency information to date has really been read from the job artifacts. We'll now be storing it in the database. We'll have a durable source of the dependency information. This is a foundational piece for continuous vulnerability scans, which is a much larger cross-group effort. And it also allows us to start creating things like group level dependency lists. So you can't see dependencies in the product today. That would have been technically challenging and not very performant to try to aggregate all of those different job artifacts across multiple different projects at the group level. So this is something we can start moving forward with now. I did want to note the functionality is still behind a feature flag. We did enable this in a limited capacity and noticed it was creating more database records than anticipated. So we've taken the step to do a refactor before we turn that flag on by default and rolled out. But we're hopeful that in the next milestone, we'll have that resolved and it will be ready and in place. So over the next 6 months, the first step is obviously to get the feature flag enabled for GitLab.com and have that on by default for self-managed. So we will have the full database backed model. We are also going to start transitioning the dependency list, the page, the UI, to be database backed. This is going to be a phased approach because we also have to incorporate very similar projects going on with license data, as well as matching up the dependencies to the vulnerability data in the database. We will work on creating designs and pages for that dependency list at the group and the subgroup level. Part of this will also be adding some basic filtering. So that is a limitation today. It is a highly requested functionality on the project dependency lists, with the stretch goal of seeing if the new database model can even support a basic search. And then since it is a new category, a lot of research and design studies are planned, which will help us have a more clear definition of what dependency management means to our customers, the general market, and then also starting to move towards a combined experience for the dependency list and license compliance page. Those today have very similar features. It's more like different views of the same information. And then ultimately working towards a more holistic design of managing dependencies and licenses at scale. And that's what we've got. We'll hand it over to Derek.
All right, thanks, Matt. So looking at what the compliance group has been doing with audit events, we added some custom HTTP headers for streaming audit events. This allows for better integration with the different SIMs or other places that you might want to stream your audit events, and helps with the authentication and authorization for the incoming streams. We also added the ability to add custom verification tokens to these streaming audit events, as well as displaying those tokens in the UI. We also went with adding more audit events, both regular audit events in the UI and streaming audit events. This is an ongoing effort, so we will be continuing to add more of these, but these are the ones that we've added in the last 6 months. And within those, things like the Git operations are particularly useful, that will log any Git operations and stream that out to wherever you need to ingest these. So let's look at the roadmap for audit events. Now, one thing that we are going to be doing is adding type information for both the streaming and non-streaming audit events. This will provide more information about the type of event that is going on, and will provide more ways to categorize this information. We'll be adding filtering both with the API and the UI for streaming audit events. This will help with being able to get just the audit events that you want, and look at what you need to specifically hone down what events you wanted to see. We will be working to add more audit events. This exact list is something that we are constantly refining. So the roadmap right now, we do not have exactly what we'll be adding, but as we go through and prioritize the different parts of GitLab to see where we need the audit events most, we'll be adding those in. One big feature that we are looking at adding right now, the audit events, there are 2 places that you can look at to see those. One of them is the streamed audit events. The other one is the UI for non-streamed events. We'll be looking at adding all of the non-streamed events into the streaming audit events, so that you can effectively get those into whatever system you need, and you're not missing anything that might be going on. And then as a part of our category maturity process, we'll be looking at moving our audit events category to complete maturity and validating that with our customers to see to make sure that it's useful for them and is what we consider complete. All right, moving on to compliance management. In the last 6 months, we've added a few things, adding MR approval rules for all protected branches, supporting failed external status checks. Before we were only supporting it when it came back as successful. Now you can see the failed status check on the MR. We have released blocking merge MR if there are failed external status checks. So this allows you to check an external system, make sure that all the components are in place for an MR to be merged. And if they aren't, then you can block that in. And then another thing that we've added that starts to move us towards more group level management for compliance frameworks is we added the ability to apply a default compliance framework for new projects at the group level. So previously you had to go in and apply it at the project level for every single project. This allows you to specify a default framework for the group, and any new projects that are created will use that framework going forward. All right, and looking at the roadmap for compliance management, we're going to be adding the ability to filter on the compliance report violations to policies by looking at all the branches or all protected branches. The biggest thing that we are going to be focusing on in the next 6 months is the group level management of compliance frameworks and pipelines to apply to the projects at that group level rather than going into each project individually. So this will allow you to apply a framework, to remove a framework, to filter and get a report on which projects are using which compliance frameworks. So it should be very useful to anyone who has more than a few projects within a group. As a part of the external status checks, we are going to be adding a retry button for the failed checks. This allows you to go in and retry those status checks to see if the external systems are ready. This is extremely useful for things where the MR is blocked based on that failed status check. It allows you to just go quickly retry. And one of the big issues that we've seen with compliance pipelines is the fact that when a GitLab CI YAML file is missing, it causes problems with those compliance pipelines being run within the project. So we're going to be working on ways to mitigate that and to handle those missing GitLab CI YAML files. And then also focusing on group level management, we'll be adding in the group level settings for the merge request approval rules to apply to the child projects so that you can manage that in a single place within the compliance configuration. And that is all for the compliance group. Back to Sam.
Thanks, Derek. There's one other area that Govern works on that I'll be covering here, and that's software supply chain security. This is an area where we don't have a dedicated group or dedicated engineers working on this. Rather, this is an area that GitLab has a direction for that spans across all of the entire product, across all of GitLab. And so really, we've been working to define that direction in conjunction with the product managers for their respective groups to see that come to fruition for the GitLab platform as a whole. Recently, we added support for SLSA Level 2 compliant attestations. These can be generated automatically by the GitLab runner simply by setting a CI variable to turn the feature on. And it'll produce basically a JSON output in the SLSA 2 standard format that describes all of the inputs that came into the build and how it was produced. Also, thanks to an engineer here in GitLab who spent some of their time outside of their normal working hours to basically develop a community contributed feature, we now have support for SSH commit signing in GitLab. I think that says 15.6. I think it actually should be 15.7, if I'm not mistaken. So we're coming out with that this release. But that's another kind of signing that makes it much more convenient if you're a developer who's trying to sign your code. Also coming up in the future, we have another community contribution that's working to add OpenPGP signing of commits done in the GitLab UI. So traditionally, we allow for signing at the Git console or on the Git command line. But if you go into the web UI or you make a suggestion on a merge request and you apply that, those commits are usually not signed today. So we've been working with that community contributor to add support for OpenPGP. Also in our future plans we're looking at adding keyless commit signing, where GitLab would be able to automatically sign those commits without using a dedicated key, and instead just using the GitLab identity. The third one that we're looking at is automated signing of build artifacts, where if you produce a build through your CI/CD system, you not only want to have that attestation, but you also want to have that signed so that you can be confident that it hasn't been modified or tampered with after the attestation or the build itself was produced. That's a large undertaking. We don't really have an end timeline on that, but we have been working to get some of the prerequisites unblocked so that we can make that possible. Just to wrap it up, I want to highlight some of the overarching roadmap themes that I've seen across all three of our groups. If we look holistically across all of those areas, we see a large theme of standardization and unification of features, where we're working to bring alignment and feature parity across the board and make things consistent and simple to use. We see that with streaming auto events. We see that in aligning the dependency list and the vulnerability list. We see that in moving towards license approval policies and away from license check. And we also see that in our future vision to combine compliance pipelines and scan execution policies. We also have a number of projects related to scalability and performance, specifically moving things to the database, where we're moving both our findings and our dependencies to be stored in the database for better performance and scalability in the future. And then lastly, we see a general focus on usability across our stage, where we're making it easier to manage things, especially at the group and subgroup levels, whether that's your dependencies, your policies, or your compliance labels. So that's all we have for today. If you'd like to ask any questions, you can do that either synchronously or asynchronously in our upcoming Q&A. Thanks for your time.